Hello, my name is Ceara Treacy. I'm a researcher with the Regulated Software Research Centre based in Dundalk in Ireland. And today I will be giving a presentation on some research that I completed whilst doing my PhD and within the Regulated Software Research Centre. It's called the Developer-Driven Framework for Security and Privacy of Data Inflow in the Internet of Medical Things. So the Regulated Software Research Centre is based in Dundalk Institute of Technology. As you can see, there's a lovely picture of Ireland here. It's part of the LERO, the Science Foundation Ireland Research Centre for Software. It's quite a large research centre and has up to 20 now participants from universities and technical universities around Ireland. This research was done by myself, Ceara Treacy there, and Professor Fergal McCaffrey was my first supervisor. He actually is the director and started the Regulated Software Research Centre. And Dr. John Lone, who is a lecturer in Dundalk Institute of Technology and is also a researcher in the centre. So what is the developer-driven framework for security and privacy of data in the flow in the Internet of Medical Things? So this was brought about with an organisation approaching the Regulated Software Research Centre, struggling to actually show adherence to the General Data Protection Regulation and security and privacy of the products for a medical device. So the development of the framework was very much done with me embedded within the organisation and the development team. The framework itself is actually built around ICEHTMC TIR 57, the recommended security risk process. It's aligned with the requirements of Article 25 of the GDPR, which is that data protection is by design and by default. This means that data protection is implemented within the product from the very beginning of the development process, and then it's continued through the life cycle of that product. It's aligned with the fact that the controller has to put appropriate technical and organizational measures in place to ensure the data is kept secure and private. TIR was selected because it is the recommended security risk process for medical devices. It aligns with the context of the safety risk management process required by ISO 14971. Also, TIR incorporates the expanded view of risk management from IEC 80001-1 by incorporating the same key properties of safety effectiveness and data and system security. Also, TIR 57 actually provided great annexes, Annex B for security risk assessment, which then directed me towards NIST SP 830. And also it provides a great Annex D for questions that can be used to identify medical device security characteristics for manufacturers to explore exactly what security aspects of the devices along the lines of 8001-2-2. So it also very much aligned with the idea of threat modeling, and that could be used to identify source of threats and vulnerabilities and how these could affect the assets. Threat modeling is now, of course, recommended by the FDA and NIST and as a cybersecurity risk assessment methodology, and also by the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, ENISA. And they state that threat modeling is a great risk threat assessment and are pillars for the security risk management. The whole framework has 6 steps in it, and it's built into a data protection impact assessment. I must say now the framework is currently based in the GDPR because the organizations I was involved with are actually embedded in the EU and therefore have to align to the regulations of the EU. It is hoped that the framework will be able and will be adaptable for all regulations around the world. The data protection impact assessment was used for the framework because it is recommended to incur the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity recommended and encouraged policymakers to use the DPIA as a means of threat modeling and building data protection by design and default into the products. So the framework was built out of, therefore, the data protection principles. You were to provide evidence for adherence to the 7 key principles introduced in slide 3, which was accuracy, storage ability, minimization, and security and confidentiality and integrity. This The framework then has properties which align both security and privacy. These were built out of two threat models, Stride, which is very familiar to those who are in security for a while, and then Linden, which is a newer model, and that's around privacy. It was also built on the ISO IEC 27033-3 set of standards, and the framework properties were built out of these. Each property has a corresponding threat type, so that helps to make sure that we can identify threats that may actually threaten the security properties, security and privacy properties. The framework then puts this into the threat modeling process, and it also provides a set of data flow and security and privacy controls that were developed out of standards that were used for IEC TIR 80001-2-8 for medical devices. There's 3 standards in that, and that were used and specifically look at the development process and technical controls that could be implemented during development to mitigate the identified threats. So we'll go through the framework. Step 1 is the contextual knowledge. It's to identify the need for a DPIA. There's quite a lot of lawful legal requirements around this and the categorization of the personal identifiable information. Then it's about understanding the framework properties. Those are the properties that the framework is working to keep safe and that make sure that they're not encroached in any way. And then there's a part of the framework as well that administrates 2 of the Linden properties and threat categories, which includes a privacy policy draft that an organization can use to build in what information they're looking for, how they're going to get consent for that information, and what the information, the personal identifiable information is going to be used for. And that's a requirement of the GDPR to make sure that the data subjects know why you're collecting their information and what they're going to do. So steps 2 through to 4 are your traditional threat modeling, and this is done together for security and privacy. Step 1 is system decomposition, data flow diagrams. The framework has a built-in table to help all of those SMEs that are developers inexperienced who've never done this before actually develop a data flow diagram. And it also provides annotations for security and privacy, so as you can see which information is in your data flow diagram in relation to security and privacy. Then it has the threat categories. The framework has always also developed a library for threats to attacks to help all of those small and medium enterprises that have no experience it, and it recommends using threat per interaction. Step 4 is analysis of the threats. Again, this is done along the lines of NIST 830, likelihood against impact, but there's also then this interaction between 14971, where you then compare harm to the security and privacy risks when you're putting any controls in to mitigate potential threats to your system. Step 5 is a very simple step. You look back, all the threats are then put into their properties. And then step 6 is where you can select a control out of a set of the security and privacy controls to mitigate the threat that you've identified. The goal of the project was to assist SMEs and inexperienced developers in the IMT to ensure security and privacy of data inflow in the IOMT in line with the data security and privacy regulations. And that, like I said before, was specifically in the GDPR. In SMEs, particularly in Ireland, it was shown that developers and designers are the key groups responsible for bringing the functional activities of compliance with the GDPR into the systems and products. And out of this, when working with the organisation, the goal was to assist the developers negotiate the GDPR requirements, because the guidelines and the actual regulation is quite intimidating and large and complicated. And there's details that are required to adhere to throughout all parts of the regulation. The lack of concise guidance and disseminated standards for security and privacy generally, and specifically in the medical device domain, made it difficult for the developers to actually navigate and find out what exactly they needed to do to show adherence to the data protection requirements. It is also then further complicated due to the lack of skilled security and privacy developers. The organizations that I went into, none of the developers had any experience with security and privacy and development, and it was quite a steep learning curve for them. And they struggled to maintain and attract talent because of this. And that was to assist in ensuring them with the requirements. So the framework has been extensively scientifically validated by experts in security and privacy standards. And then it was piloted in the development teams of multiple medical device organizations. And just to finish with a comment from one of the CTOs of the organization I was involved with, we had no idea what was needed and the framework completely took the guesswork away. So thank you for listening to my presentation today, and my details are up on this slide there for anyone who'd like to get in contact.